Wicked Revelations.
The following program is
Hey,
intended
everyone.
for mature audiences.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. So today, top of the news, the CIA is hiding evidence regarding MK Ultra and mind control, taking files out of the hands of Tulsi Gabbard. Have 36 headlines to get through. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in China. The fact that we have half the media talking about Donald Trump and the U.S. dominating and having all the cards, and then all the elite media and the socialists saying that China has all the cards and Trump is going to walk away from this deal with nothing. He might walk away from the summit with nothing. But what we do understand is that we, in fact, hold all the cards. 36 headlines to get through in the next hour. So let's get started. We're going to start out with Fox News. Trump heads to China with upper hand, and Xi knows it. Trump's deregulation, energy dominance, and USMCA, that's the trade deal between Mexico and Canada, and the supply chain shifts have eroded Beijing's once powerful leverage. This is a Fox News opinion piece by Alexander Gray. So it's the opinion of Alexander Gray that Trump heads into China with the upper hand. Now, why is there such a discrepancy between what people like Alexander Gray are saying and others who say that Trump doesn't have any leverage? The raid in Venezuela gave Trump leverage. The capturing of Maduro gave Trump leverage. The war in Iran, the blockade of the Hormuz Strait gives Trump leverage. The tariffs, well, that are being fought about in court give Trump leverage. All these things make the United States stronger and communist China weaker. That is the question. In the past, the United States has basically relinquished its reign as world hegemony or hegemonic power. But now Trump, and this is the whole thing about Trump and what people within the Patriot movement and America First and all these other things, the key was to bring the United States back into a position of ascension and not decay. And that's what everybody's saying. Oh, the United States is a dead empire and what have you. But that's propaganda coming out of China and the people that built China. China didn't build itself. Let's be real. And then there are many folks agreeing with Xi Jinping and the Chinese communist propaganda that China is our partner and is or a economic rival, and it's nothing of the sort. The modern China, even before that, but the communist Chinese state was built to supplant the United States in a variety of different ways. Let's go to Ben Shapiro, that wrote an article for PJ Media, article number 3, China our enemy, not our rival. Now, I'm not a fan of Ben Shapiro, but he is clear in this article about what we're talking about. China is not merely America's geopolitical opponent, it is America's geopolitical enemy and has been since the establishment of the Chinese Communist regime in 1949. For decades, American leaders and elites indulged in the fantasy that this reality could be softened or reversed. Richard Nixon opened relations with China in part to split Beijing from the Soviet Union. So they say that was the strategy. That's not really what it was for. Later, economic globalists insisted that bringing China into the global markets would moderate its politics. The theory was that free trade would lead to a freer people. That's not true, and that's not the reason they did all this. The reason they did all this is China had to be a closed society during the Cultural Revolution because they didn't want anybody to see not only the Chinese, the communists in China, but also the people that built the communist state. It's the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union started, they closed off society so nobody could peer in at the time and see what was going on there in their Cultural Revolution. And so when they reached back out to China after the communist state was well established, and this was to create slave labor in the communist state that was created by the West. Goes on to say in the PJ Media article by Ben Shapiro, China never stopped being what it has always been, a communist surveillance state with an appetite for repression at home and influence abroad. It is historically mass murdering regime and a government whose ambition is nothing less than the destruction of America's global dominance. And that's the reason it was created. And China plays the long game. Unlike democratic nations that operate on election cycles, the Chinese Communist Party operates on decades. It can wait, it can plan, it can exploit. It has even taken advantage of Americans' openness, our markets, our universities, even our political institutions to undermine us within. In this case, Ben Shapiro is not wrong. Story goes on to say whether it's the theft of tens of billions of dollars in intellectual property, the infiltration of American universities, or the influence campaigns aimed at shaping our public discourse, China has treated the United States like an enemy because it has always been. Yes, of course, you could argue it was built to be our enemy to replace the crumbling Soviet Union. That was already crumbling by the 50s. And made to be a more perfect communist state. Story goes on to say America must cut off China's sources of revenue and influence. Much of President Donald Trump's foreign policy has been aimed at this. Pressure against Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela was about oil revenue that strengthens China. The same is true with Iran, a major supplier of oil going to Beijing. Even the war in Ukraine has implications as Russia increasingly functions as a resource pipeline for China. Third, America must strengthen itself. One of the most dangerous vulnerabilities we face is financial dependency. China owns trillions of dollars in American debt. The implicit threat is always present. Beijing could dump U.S. bonds onto the market and destabilize our country. So then you have to ask yourself, why would leaders within the United States or anyone else suggest this course of action to make ourselves so vulnerable to China? And the reasoning being is that it is a plan. This is a plan. It's a plan to undermine America's dominance, infiltrate the country, and allow the communist Chinese state to ascend to world dominance and their own hegemony. We've let it happen. And for the purpose it was organized to happen, it was a plan, it is a conspiracy for what is coming. Now, many people say that we can't see into the future. That's just not true. The powerful have always wanted to see into the future, and they have and do because they allow their money to decide what happens in the future. So they actually build the future, and what they don't build, they want to know. And that is their obsession with intelligence and prediction. And that's how the stock market works. So they know, that's why they call it the New World Order agenda, because they know the Davos crowd, they know what's going to happen in the future. Trump isn't changing the course of history, isn't changing their agenda. He's a bump in the road as far as they're concerned. The actions that President Donald Trump is taking is exactly that, to undo the agenda, what they built for the future, to some extent, as far as state diplomacy goes on a geopolitical level. What we do understand, though, is that Trump isn't perfect. So Trump is also aiding into things that uh, are going to be very bad for human liberty and human endeavor and so forth and so on. That is the funding of AI and the continual protection and aid to harmful corporations that do us dirty in a lot of different ways. Okay. I blathered on too much about that. Article number 4, just the news. New York man convicted of running secret Chinese police station in Manhattan. You've heard about this. Harry Lu Jingwang was convicted after evidence showed his dealings with China's Ministry of Public Security, which is the communist Chinese CIA, or FBI, I should say, which had instructed him to hang a banner inside a glass building that declared it was a police overseas service station for China's Fujian province. Liu now faces up to 10 years in prison after he was convicted of acting as a foreign agent and obstructing justice by deleting some of his messages with Chinese officials. So he was spying, and what they do, and this is not debated. Some of the people on the left want to make it seem like, oh, you made this up because he was just, communicating with the China's Ministry of Public Security. But he wasn't running a police station. They have Chinese security or proxies thereof all over the United States, policing expatriates and as well as Chinese citizens. He was acquitted, though, of a third charge of conspiring with others to act as a Chinese agent. He certainly was, though. He shouldn't have been acquitted on that. But that's when you have these people in the United States that don't put country first. A Chinese police station operating in New York City at the direction of the Chinese government has been exposed. Its sinister purpose disrupted and its founder held accountable for blatantly disregarding the law of our country's sovereignty. Yep. And so why people don't understand, like as Ben Shapiro said, they're our enemy. They've always acted like our enemy, but with good at giving some sort of platitude toward people. So Trump returns in kind with the platitudes and stuff, but I think Trump is going to peddle a hard bargain. Wall Street Journal, Xi's Taiwan warning to Trump highlights tensions in Beijing summit. Chinese later raises issues that clouds Trump's hope for the best summit ever. Trump just said that. He constantly puts out statements that he doesn't necessarily believe to be true, but that are hopeful or a good PR exercise. We knew, everybody knew, going into this summit is that Trump wanted concessions from China. So China dangled out what they want the most, which is Taiwan. He wants assurances from the Trump administration that we won't intervene if they go to take Taiwan. And if Trump does give them those assurances, then we will see China take Taiwan in quick fashion. There must have been some sort of tacit agreement before COVID that when COVID hits, if China allows the West to perpetrate, because it was really perpetrated by the West, it wasn't China, the COVID scam, that they would get Hong Kong, at which they immediately rolled in. It was not even February where security services started rolling into Hong Kong from mainland China. National Review has the headline, story number 6, the fall of China. Well, what is this? People can go broke predicting the collapse in places they don't understand, but it's harder and harder to look at China and not see a state and civilization that is already on the wrong side of the mountain, rapidly heading down slope. As we all know, a huge component of economic growth is population growth. That's long since over for China. Workers are older and demanding more in salary, and the older population is starting to really burden the smaller, younger generation. The 4-to-1 social model, 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and 1 child, is a disaster. There seems to be a persistent deflationary pressure throughout the Chinese economy. Prices are stagnating or falling in retail sectors, and this is true for oil and gasoline as well. This is okay for older savers and those on fixed incomes, but it's a disaster for young workers, indebted localities, and entrepreneurs. You don't have growth. China's authoritarianism is working against growth with new crackdowns on private firms in tech, finance, education, and even among foreign NGOs. In this way, China's saber rattling about Taiwan and the suppression of Hong Kong look like attempts to solve with militarism and displays of strength and deteriorating optimism and patriotism, as the Chinese social model no longer delivers regular increases in quality of life that it did for several decades. And that was with, again, manipulated economy to provide these things. So the National Review has it right here that if you haven't been reading the news for a year about China, China's economy is in bad shape. And that was just at the start of Trump's second term, when he even just started the tariffs. But the tariffs are about China. Venezuela was about China. Iran is really about China. We don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but the play now is more about China, which could have spurred Trump's decision to go into the Persian Gulf for another Middle East war. This could have spurred it on. I still think it's a weaponry thing, but the weapons indeed are even tied to China. And they were going to expedite the weapons transfers, especially because I think after what happened in Maduro, which was a surprise for most people, I think the China even saw what was coming. And so they began to fortify their position in the Persian Gulf with Iran. And that's why Trump acted when he did. When he saw those weapons shipments coming in, he had to say no. Okay, New York Post article number 7, Rubio aims to convince China to play a more active role in pressuring Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. Like I said previously, I think China's just in a bad spot. Of course, they're going to ask for Taiwan, but I think they're going to have to make some very serious agreements. And I think it's the United States judicial system that made a grave error, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they did it on purpose, to not allow Trump to tariff foreign entities, foreign nation states, particularly China, because it's all about China. And if people don't understand that, they're missing the point. Well, Rubio went on to say, we made the argument to the Chinese, and I hope it's compelling, that they'll have a chance to do something about it at the United Nations later this week, when there's a resolution just condemning Iran on what they're doing in the Straits. And also, you have to remember that there was a resolution in the UN that everybody voted for, mostly the Europeans, that there was a declaration that Iran has to open the Straits of Hormuz. And there were 2 countries with veto power that vetoed the resolution. One was Russia and one was China. Look, there are 3 things, Marco said. The Chinese have ships stuck in the Persian Gulf because setting up a system that says we're going to let certain ships through but not others is easier said than done. And I didn't go to the other 2 things. You gotta excuse me. But let's be clear that our blockade is not only threatening Iran, but threatening China. And the Russians don't want to pick another fight. And that the Chinese aren't prepared, because when we do something that is a blockade, that is really an act of war, but technically we're at war with Iran, And you could say it's reciprocal. Um, but the Chinese and the Russians know that's an act of war, world war, and they haven't done anything about it, which means we're in the better position. I'm not happy about that, but you can't deny that because Trump made a bad policy decision, that doesn't put the United States in a good position in relation to China or Russia for that matter. Fox News Iran says its small subs deployed to Strait of Hormuz as expert explains those threats are vulnerable to detection. The submarine deployment was highlighted by Bloomberg and first reported in the semi-official Tassim news agency. They call them, I think that's where the mistake was made. They called them the dolphins of the Persian Gulf. People thought they're using dolphins. But these mini subs, first of all, the surveillance capability of the U.S. military, satellite, other sonar nets, detections, thermal imaging, night vision, all these things put the advanced technologies that we have put the United States in a very good spot militarily, but also diplomatically. Trump's upbeat China message collides with deepening Beijing rivalry. Fox News, story number 9. Delegation includes Apple's Tim Cook, Elon Musk, and BlackRock's Larry Fink as talks focus on aerospace and agriculture. Is that right? That was from a couple days ago already, but we know that, of course, Trump is going to play the deal maker. He's going to laud the Chinese with all sorts of flowery appreciation. But in reality, he could make a deal with China. If China resists, we know where we are. And we know where we are anyway, because despite this story by Morgan Phillips, who said the headline, she probably didn't write the headline, but it says, Trump's upbeat message collides with deepening Beijing rivalry. It's not rivalry, they're the enemy. I'm not making them the enemy. The Chinese made themselves the enemy. It's just like the Islamic regime in Iran. They made themselves the enemy. You know, the United States support for the Savak didn't help. But China, by choosing communism, made the United States their enemy. In the middle of the Cold War, the Chinese, or at least presumably some of the Chinese revolutionaries chose communism. Trump arrives, and that's the thing that people said, oh, in the 90s or in the 80s or even in the 70s, oh, if we're just nice and open up trade with communism, they'll cease to be communist. That's what drove them to power. Trump arrives seeking headline deals and visible momentum ahead of the midterms. Wrote a senior fellow for Chinese studies at the Council of Foreign Relations. Xi is playing a longer game focused on strategic patience rather than substantive compromise. And so it's the people at the Council of Foreign Relations that built China. It's these groups and individuals. So, of course, they know the strategy, and the strategy is the long game. Isolate the country, play the long game, just like Iran is playing, because it's not a democracy. So you don't have to worry about elections. You don't have to worry about working with Congress to acquire funding to continue the war. It doesn't. Authoritarian regimes, of course, their tactic is always to wait out democratic governments. Gatestone Institute has story number 10. Trump can stare down a weak Xi Jinping this week. Xi Jinping's inward-facing actions, however, betray a deep sense of insecurity. Trump could take advantage of that. China's people to the regime building material and now extremely unhappy in the Communist Party engineering state. Gloom as a result has descended over Chinese society. Xi has responded to the unhappiness in society by initiating a censorship campaign against excessively pessimistic sentiment. Most significantly, he will not He's not willing to implement structural changes to put more money in the pockets of the laboring or the common folk. No wonder Chinese intellectuals and social media users refer to this moment in their countries as garbage time of history. Unfortunately, Xi considers the United States an existential threat, not because of anything Americans say or do, but because of who they are. An insecure ruling organization in Beijing is afraid of an inspirational impact of American values and form of governance on the Chinese people. Just like if you weren't watching what was happening in Hong Kong before it was taken over, it was cries for liberty. This means, try as Americans might, their democracy will never be amicable relations or have amicable relations with China as long as it is ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. Well, that's an interesting take. I think it's very accurate. I'm not going to go along with the New York Times and say China is ascension, China is ascending, and American imperialism is decaying, and all this other garbage. Not that I'm a fan of imperialism. I'm just saying is that freedom has always attracted the best, the brightest from around the world, and even fostered that within the country. And that's why America is as great as it is. If you made America into an oppressive dictatorship, it would not be the society. So the worst thing that could happen to America is start limiting their free speech or their ability to do what they will. The New York Times live updates. After Xi's warning on Taiwan, he and Trump strike positive tone. Xi Jinping, Chinese leader, this is just the latest, told President Trump that if Taiwan issue were handled poorly, it could lead to a clash with the United States. Later at a state dinner, they emphasized cooperation. Again, the warning on Taiwan. What's happening? The summit, the first U.S. presidential visit to China in nearly a decade, could determine whether a détente between the two countries will continue, what détente, and what concessions, if either side is willing to make. The leaders met in the Chinese capital in a ceremony laden with pageantry and pleasantries. And then the New York Times asked the question, where are the women at the Trump-Xi summit? That's their concern, where the women are. Not the diplomacy. America is in good shape. And this is, and I want to go back to this picture just for a second. There's Monica Crowley all the way in the right. So there are women at the Trump-Xi summit. I just want to go on and say the leftists around the world and the elite, the New World Order, Communist China are all working together for this New World Order to happen, this rise of a socialist nanny state with the corporate artificial intelligence over that. But that doesn't spell well. It doesn't look well for humanity, at least liberties and concerning the welfare of humans on the planet, the endeavors they want to undertake. Despite all these future promises, I mean, some of you might not be that old, but when I was a kid, it was the Jetsons, and in the future you'll never have to work, but you want to have something to do, not just play video games. But there was like, oh, it's going to go down to a 4-day work week, then a 3-day work week, then a 2. Don't worry. The future, you're not going to have to do anything, lift a finger. But that didn't materialize. Actually, people had to work more. You couldn't just have a single salary household. The wife had to go out and work, or you had to have 2 people working, because then if you want to both work, one salary goes entirely to childcare. So It was this promise that never materialized, and I believe the same thing is going to happen with AI. It's going to be seen with wonder at first, and oh, this is such a great thing, but it's not going to be something you're going to be able to put back in the bottle. Like I said 2 years ago, I said that when AI first came on the scene, it was released out of the bottle. You're never going to put the genie back in the bottle. Fox News, what Xi wants from Trump as Beijing seeks leverage in high-stakes summit. Analysts say Xi is playing a longer game focused on strategic patience rather than substantive compromise. We know this. Washington Post, China gains major edge, of course, the Washington Post, on U.S. amid Iran war. Intelligence reports a confidential assessment circulating as President Donald Trump begins his highly anticipated trip to Beijing shows shifts in several key areas of competition. But again, with the CIA's Washington Post here, the power is in the headline. China gains major edge because it's, if you know anything about the CIA, they're rooting for communist state to take over. Confidential U.S. intelligence analysis details how China is exploiting the war in Iran to maximize its advantage over the United States across military, economic, diplomatic, and other fields. Said two people that aren't quoted by name. The assessment, the official said, was produced this week for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Cain, and has raised alarm within the Pentagon about the geopolitical costs of Washington's standoff with Tehran as President Donald Trump enters high-stakes talks with Beijing's President Xi Jinping in Beijing. The report produced by the Joint Chiefs of Staff Intelligence Directorate uses what's known as DIME framework, a reference for 4 key instruments of state power to assess China's response to Iran, or to the Iran conflict: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. And again, they say, oh, in all those 4, in the 4 pillars of the framework there, oh, they're so good. Diplomatic, they're just wonderful. They're not. What happened in Panama? What happened in Venezuela? Actually, their client states around the world are actually backing away and leaning more toward the United States. Informational. We've known from their satellite analysis, the Chinese analyzing their own satellite data, that they don't know how to do it. They haven't had satellites long enough to perfect it, not as long as we've had. Military, it seems like they're a paper tiger. On parade, everything looks wonderful. They're flexing around Taiwan. It looks formidable, but they've never been tested. Apparently, there have been some platoons sent to Ukraine under the guise of being North Korean. And they've fared, the North Koreans, if they are North Koreans and not Chinese, and the Chinese have fared very poorly in Ukraine. And then economic. Well, they have a manipulated economy. And so if they were just allowing the economy to unfold organically, you could say, they wouldn't be doing as well. So, they manipulate their currency and they do a lot of other funny stuff that free democracies aren't allowed to do. So their economy is growing 5%, but it's not in double digits anymore. And most people are talking about a deflationary spiral they're facing. And of course, they have to worry about unrest because the population is, for the most part, oppressed. Some groups more than others, and they know, even in a free country, you're going to have revolutionary revolutionary ideas sprouting up here and there. Daily Express U.S., China's terrifying World War III come into conflict, warning to Trump over Taiwan. And the Express, which is a British deal, again, echoing the global socialists online. For President Xi, Taiwan is the one issue that could lead to trouble between the U.S. and China if it isn't handled correctly, or as that the Chinese said, poorly. We're not going to handle it poorly. You could handle it poorly. We were hoping, since the 70s, that you would become more like the Free Chinese on Taiwan. But instead, you maintained the councilism of the Communist Party, Politburo style, and you didn't even relent with trade and other things, open up your markets and so forth and so on. As much as we would have liked to have seen, and in comparison to Taiwan. So instead of communist China becoming more like Taiwan, like Trump always presents, and they presented the same thing to North Korea or even Hamas, and say, hey, look, if you stop with all this militarism and open up your society, things will be great. But unfortunately, dictators don't like to open their society because it allows for infiltration, as we know in this open society where the Chinese have infiltrated everywhere. So they see it as a weakness. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be a free society. We absolutely should, but a free society has to be policed more. Zero Hedge Russia think tank tells Chinese media that U.S. endgame in Iran is to achieve market monopoly. To some extent, this is true. The main goal of Trump is to shake up the market because if you monitor all logistic companies, oil companies, LNG companies, you will find that the big players have started to consume their mid-tier and small players. It's the merchant class that pretty much built America for freedom, but mostly free business principles. That's where maritime admiralty law comes from. It's the law of the land, or really of the sea, but you know what I'm saying. So it's important that he's bringing all the players with him because it's about the free market as much as it is about the sovereign state of the United States. For example, Maersk, one of the biggest logistics companies in the world, can wait for just 1 or 2 months and suffer financial losses, but some smaller companies from Greece simply can't withstand such pressure. And it helps this conflict monopolize the market. So Iran is just a mere tool to achieve market monopolization because you know quite well that Trump's policies rely on profit. He is a businessman or a merchant. So he acts in his and his team's financial interests. And if you place your financial interest above political reputation, above your nation, then your actions have to have economic roots. This guy sounds like a communist because that's what you have to understand. The roots itself, the economic roots of this country and the merchant class and all that. And in that case, he is right. He is correct. Will this produce market monopolization? Perhaps. But was that the explicit goal? Yeah, you don't have any evidence to make that ring true for me. Will it be a result? A lot of smart people, when they contemplate an operation, the reward has to be multi-vectored. There has to be all sorts of pluses for conducting the operation. I think a foreign diplomacy person, says it's all about China and thwarting China's ability to send in more advanced weapons to Iran, which would have made this situation even more, let's say, unpredictable. Zero Hedge again, Trump's booming war economy explained in one chart. So you see it right there. 50 billion, 270 investments, 70,000 new jobs, new facilities, new square footage, new military industrial companies, 39 plus states that contribute to the war effort, and 190 plus cities. As I've always said, people are like, you need to cut the defense budget to zero. And I'm like, okay. But the problem is the economic effect of that would be devastating. Because I'm not for war, but the United States being tied, the economic might of the United States is tied to corporations. And some of the most powerful corporations are in the defense industry. It's like saying you got to outlaw all banks. I mean, Okay. But what's it going to do to the economy if you try to do that overnight? The Federalist, story number 17, the Iran war is piling up a list of surprises. Wall Street Journal reported that the Israeli military built a covert base inside Iraq to support its airstrikes against Iran, then attacked Iraqi troops who approached the base to investigate. So it was a clandestine covert base. A growing series of reports is showing that the war has involved more belligerents than we knew about. Reports over the weekend revealed that the United Arab Emirates has conducted military strikes inside Iran, bombing a refinery in retaliation for Iranian attacks. Similar reports followed about the Saudi military striking targets inside Iran. U.S. government website that publishes notices of foreign arms sales shows this recent buying spree in which Iran's neighbors are stocking up on weapons. Significant new disclosures in May show Iran arms sales to Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, and Israel, including the sale of tens of thousands of advanced precision kill weapon system 2. Oh, those are JDAMs. To Qatar and Israel, and a smaller number of air-to-air variant to UAE. Yeah, and then it goes on to say that that system turns unguided rockets into precision weapons. So it's like a JDAM. I think it's a little different because it's rockets, not missiles. Or bombs. I think JDAMs are for bombs. Fox News ship seized near Strait of Hormuz by unauthorized personnel brought toward Iran. This is breaking news, story number 18. The British military announced Thursday that a ship, I don't know if it's one of theirs, anchored off the coast of the United Arab Emirates, has been seized and is now heading toward Iranian waters as tensions remain high in the Strait of Hormuz. Well, this is interesting news because of just what we read. So Iran knows that the UAE is an enemy combatant, and so the enemy combatants, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are more susceptible to attack. And here you go, but this is terrorism. It's a commercial ship. I mean, it's not a legitimate target in a war. Zero hedge Democrats are not in good shape for the midterms. Story number 19. The conventional wisdom heading into 2026 was simple enough. An unpopular president, a restless electorate, and history's gravitational pull toward the opposition party would deliver the House back to the Democrats. Democrats were counting on Virginia's new map to give them 4 more solid seats heading into the midterms, but the Virginia Supreme Court struck it down in a 4-3 ruling, finding that the Democrat-led legislature violated its procedural requirements when referring the measure to voters. Democrats quickly appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, but experts largely agree that the High Court won't take its case because it's open and shut. It was a procedural thing that they sidestepped. They were supposed to meet for 2 days, basically sleep on it, and they met for 1 day in an extended session. And the Virginia House did. And also, when they presented the referendum to voters, the way it was worded was a little misleading. So everybody here knows CNN's Harry Enton. And on Monday, Enton called the outcome for what it is. I think it's fairly safe to say that the Republicans will, in fact, win the redistricting wars. A nightmare for Democrats. On Tuesday, Enton pointed out that the new polling shows Democrats leading the generic congressional ballot by just 3 points, which is in the margin of error. Democrats are up by 3 points. And I want you to note the yellow lettering. Just because Donald Trump is unpopular doesn't make Democrats unpopular, Enton observed, delivering the line with the understand precision of someone who has been waiting to say it for months. Perhaps most striking is the erosion of the Democratic generic ballot lead over a matter of weeks. In March, Democrats held a 6-point advantage, and it's almost compressed to 3. That kind of momentum is in the wrong direction, cutting the lead in half during a period when Trump's economic numbers cratered. It's not what an opposition surge looks like. As Politico put it, Democrats are arguably on worse footing in their bid to retake the House than they were just 1 year ago. And a lot of people have expressed why, and that is because they don't have a clear and popular message. So many sane Democrats around the country, like Harold Ford on the 5, he says it perfectly clear. He goes, or even Fetterman, we have to develop a message that is popular with Democrats and that will get us elected. And usually that is kitchen table issues. Mostly any expenses that that Trump administration created for the electorate should be pointed out. They're trying to do that, but again, they're stuck on this cultural moral crusade constantly because that had worked. The culture wars had worked previously. So what the evil schemer always does is go to what had worked in their plan. And so they're not going to abandon what worked because they're afraid of switching gears now. It might make things worse. And so that's what evil people always do. They cling to what's working, even if it's just working a little bit. Just the News CIA employee testifies Fauci improperly influenced COVID-19 origin report. I didn't cover this whole testimony about this whistleblower that Rand Paul brought forward, James Erdman. And I don't know why it was worded this way. I think Rand Paul was courting this guy, and the guy said, well, I'm not going to come out until the prosecution, what do they call it? I'm sorry, I'm blanking here. Well, they couldn't prosecute Fauci anymore. A couple days ago, what's it called? I'm sorry, guys. One American News also chimes in, whistleblower CIA suppressed lab leak evidence to protect official federal narrative. Erdman, a former intelligence officer and military veteran, provided his testimony just 2 days after the statute of limitations. That's what I was trying to think. Expiration of the statute of limitations for potential charges against Dr. Anthony Fauci regarding allegations he lied to Congress in 2021, which he did, of course. In addition to his intelligence background, Erdman is known to be the co-founder of Feds for Freedom, a grassroots organization established to challenge federal vaccine mandates and address claims of religious exemption discrimination, both of which I had to deal with myself. So he's really forwarding his Feds for Freedom agenda more than wanting to prosecute Anthony Fauci. But the reason I didn't really cover this at length, or even the reported nature of his testimony, that he's just saying shit we already knew. It's, you hate people to come out 20 years after the fact and go, oh, that conspiracy theory you had? Yeah, well, it was true. Fox News has the top 4 explosive moments from CIA whistleblowers' testimony on alleged COVID-19 lab leak cover-up. Erdman alleges Fauci helped suppress COVID origins, prompting calls for a criminal prosecution. Realistically, we knew this as it was happening. We heard about the emails. It was really in 2020 when we heard about, there was some reports that Anthony Fauci at the onset was discussing the lab leak theory with his cohorts. And then that was dismissed, and then the emails turned up. GOP Senator Ron Johnson demands apology from CIA Director Ratcliffe because basically what the whistleblower said was the CIA knew that it was all a lie. Democrats boycott hearings, sparking GOP backlash. So the Democrats didn't even go to the whistleblower testimony. They don't care about the truth. This is probably the most disturbing thing about his testimony, is that the Democrats boycotted it. Why? You don't want to know that it was that the head scientist in the United States regarding the pandemic was lying about the origins, so China wouldn't be painted in a bad light? Who knows? Maybe nationalists did it to frame China. It seems, though, that China and whoever released it because I do believe it was a release, the timing is suspect, is they were in agreement. And I think a lot of it had to do with giving them Hong Kong. CIA failed to comply with COVID origins investigation, Erdman alleges. And then I want to get into this other article, article number 23, about the Trump administration blocking an AI company from recruiting foreigners for hiring over American workers. Is from the Post Millennial. Protecting the integrity of our immigration and labor systems requires employees to follow the law and provide American workers a fair opportunity to compete for jobs. I also think that this is some favoritism, cronyism going on with Trump. He has a lot of AI buddies that he's dealing with. So this is kind of an AI startup. What's the company called? Cloudera. And so he's blocking foreign recruitment. But I bet you that he's allowing foreign recruitment from OpenAI and a lot of the other ones. Post Millennial again, story number 24, appeals court blocks $83.3 million payment to E. Jean Carroll pending SCOTUS review of the Trump appeal. This is, again, $83 million, and this is for defamation. Trump. And so everybody said, oh, he's a rapist. It was a civil compensation for defamation. There was not a criminal trial. And, you know, it was another made up thing. But in any case, 83 million. So, okay. Alex Jones was fined $1.5 billion. $1 billion for defamation. How is that? You would have to demonstrate lost revenue of $1 billion. So it definitely wasn't about that. And 83 million. Well, E. Jean Carroll was an author, so, but I would beg to differ. I would beg the attention she got probably made her more wealthy than less wealthy. And then we're going to go back to this story here from PJ Media. CIA went rogue, raided Tulsi's office to seize papers. Breaking news alert from Fox News, apparently confirmed by Republican Congresswoman, that states a Central Intelligence Agency went rogue, raiding the office of the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and seized files. So this came from Anna Paulina Luna. And then we're learning from just the news here, though, that the DNI denies reports CIA raided Tulsi Gabbard's office to seize documents related to JFK MK Ultra file. But you have to look at the story here. The original reports for the raid came from Anna Paulina Lua, as I mentioned. But the DNI says there was no raid, but they did come to seize documents related to the MK Ultra and John F. Kennedy assassination because they were about to be released. Tulsi Gabbard was reviewing the documents. So if you don't know what MK Ultra is, it's the CIA conducted experiments and studied the potential use of LSD and other drugs for mind control and information gathering purposes. So if you don't know the history of MK Ultra or the history of mind control experimentation, it's about the psyche, about understanding how to manipulate a person through the actual fragmentation of the psyche, and then controlling one of those fragmented parts in a way that overrides the person's morals or reluctance to do certain things, their inhibition. So they realized that although they had a lot of insight using LSD, these MK Ultra experiments also involve sex and sex with children. And we can't forget about the Finders case, right? So I'm not going to go into it here, but look into the Finders. So what they did is basically they drugged people and studied them when they were on LSD. It gave them insight into the person's psychology, into their psyche, et cetera, and the way people behaved, how they were emotionally driven, et cetera, et cetera. Those studies led them to believe two things. that if you drug someone, that could make them more manipulated, more manipulable, or controllable, but it also revealed how vulnerable people's psychology is and how it's influenced by their emotions and so forth and so on. So anyway, they went on and said there's a clarification. No one took documents. The ODNI has jurisdiction over. This did not happen today, and it was not a raid. It didn't happen that day, they said. This is a clarification. It didn't happen on Wednesday. It was not a raid. However, it did take place, and we were just being made aware of it based on reporting. So the CIA did take documents that were under the jurisdiction of the Director of National Intelligence, but it didn't happen on Wednesday, and it wasn't a raid. So were they stolen? Maybe they were stolen. One American News GOP lawmakers detail claims of selective surveillance and political targeting under the Biden's Department of Justice. Several Republican lawmakers held a news conference on Wednesday alleging the Department of Justice under President Joe Biden administration engaged in a pattern of unfair surveillance and meritless investigations against them due to their political leanings. We don't have to go any further. I mean, they did it to Trump. They did it to everybody. They did it to citizenry after January 6th. Imagine when they get and solidify power, if they get back into federal power and solidify that. Imagine packing the court, getting rid of the filibuster. It's done. Keeping all the cheating mechanisms in place in the states. And then you'll see one state after another become a Democrat supermajority in the whole country. Post-millennial California gave every state prisoner an iPad. They used them to watch porn, stalk, and groom children. Thanks, Governor Newsom. Right. Punishment is punishment. You don't give people opportunity when they're in prison unless maybe they can justify it, certainly. I also think there should be different sections of prisons that you get less and less incarceration. You know, like it goes from supermax. It only goes from supermax to a solitary confinement to general population. I think there should be more levels. Post-millennial again, story number 29, DOJ demands sanctuary states rescind unconstitutional policies blocking ICE, federal law enforcement from obtaining undercover license plates. So Todd Blanche put a warning out and said, if you keep the federal government from obtaining covert license plates, so license plates that don't say ICE on it, because some states were even considering that if ICE is driving around, they have to be in cars that have the license plate ICE on it. And of course, Todd Blanche and the others working for the federal government says you're putting the agents at risk, which of course they are. Again, from the post-millennial, Vance-led task force withholds $1.3 billion in Medicaid payments from California over fraud concerns. Vance says the state has not taken fraud very seriously. It's not the states, it's the Democrats. What the Democrats do is it's pay for play, it's payola. So in reward for their support, they offer communities the ability and the opportunity to commit fraud. We saw that here in, was it Connecticut or New York, with Acorn when the O'Keefe did that undercover thing. But you see it in California, Minnesota, everywhere. Just open a business and say you're providing the service and you could get millions of dollars. Sick. More from post-millennial, also sick. Post-millennial gay dads with 5 sons, including from surrogate, arrested for child abuse. These 2 guys, Joshua Lee Gilliam and Ronald Wayne Lynch, were in possession of child sexual abuse material, but they also have 5 children. Yeah, they face $360,000 bond. Yeah, it's just, we heard this in Georgia. Remember the gay couple in Georgia who were not only having sex with their two adopted kids and filming it, making money off it, but also from uh, pimping out their kids to their friends and so forth and so on for money. Happened. The National Review, the 30 years warning. We have the headline here, and this is about the bond market. So 5% yields on 30-year treasuries for the first time since 2007. A surging energy prices push inflation expectations for more of it higher. That number was noted in Iran, among other places, as the regime here tries to calculate the White House's tolerance for economic and thus political pain brought about by the war. So 30-year bond, when the yield goes up, that means inflation's going up, and that's bad for the economy. So when the treasury yields, the bond market goes down, that's better for the stock market and for inflation. Getting into some tech news, the Telegraph, humanity faces uncertain fate as experts brace for super intelligent AI. Artificial intelligence industry comes looming singularity with will change everything. Indeed, the artificial intelligence is, of course, is going to change everything, and in such a rate that it'll have people's heads spinning. But they won't notice because they'll be in their house, um, fearing the hantavirus. Who likes AI? Raise their hand. More international news: the United States is flying spy planes and drones over surveilling that are surveilling Cuba. This is from the New York Times, story number 34. As President Trump threatens to act against Cuba, more U.S. spy plane. As President Trump threatens to act against Cuba, experts are debating whether the flights, which the United States has not taken pains to hide, are just intimidation or foreshadow military force. Well, we know what's happening here. Trump already said, as soon as we're done with Iran, Cuba's next. And so Cuba can make a deal, but in any case, a country in the Western Hemisphere so close to the shores of Florida needs to be better aligned with the United States and its values. Zero Hedge United, the United, I don't know what's happening here. Zero Hedge, the U.S. has restarted jungle warfare in Panama after 25 years. If you didn't know, there's a very famous jungle warfare training center in Panama for many years, ever since we built the canal, really. But it was closed. Man, was it back in the 70s? It was after we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We were like, we're out of here. Um, but they restarted it, which that's a good sign. Obviously, it's such a critical waterway. And that people don't understand is like Trump is positioning the United States to be in a better place and to stop uh, giving up, basically. And it's not even like we're giving up. It's like they don't want the United States to be the preeminent superpower in the world because of individual civil liberties or liberties in general regarded to the individual person, human. Zero Hedge again, it's either us or them. Far left French mayor calls for insurrection if conservatives win presidential election. If you don't know the National Rally and Marine Le Pen's, that whole thing that was started by her father, which was right wing and conservative in nature, has become way more mainstream. and they used to be called, I'm sure that's where they got the fascist rhetoric for Trump. They got in Europe when they were calling the far right. And so the far left mayor of Saint Denis is calling for a popular insurrection if Marie Le Pen's party wins, which they're likely to do, because despite what happened with Orban, conservative populism is still gaining ground around the world. And even more so, that people are leaning back towards the United States and liberty, not even towards Europe anymore, because they've abandoned their liberal principles. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Remember, you're under attack psychologically and biologically, so stay hip to the trick. Stay hip to that mind control that they're using right now. So if you're on antidepressants or any sort of pharmaceutical that could be considered psychoactive, which most of them are, you could be ripe for mind control. So they get you hooked on these drugs, and then they slip into your DMs, so to speak, get to you over the internet somehow, and as AI or a sock puppet, and say, hey, why don't you go shoot up a school or what have you? And of course, the drugs give you the propensity to do those sorts of things. So stay clear of the mind control, and also biologically eat clean food. All right, join me every day, Monday through Friday, live stream 10 a.m. on Rumble. Check out episode 144 of Tuesdays with Perry, went live last night, where we discussed a lot of the latest issues, antivirus, China, Iran, U.S. economy, and so forth and so on. So check that out. I'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
Google me, bitch! Google me!